Welcome to the PR in Lockdown podcast, your guide to PR and communications in a post-lockdown world. Produced by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA. I'm Rob Double, and in this episode I'm talking to Nyree and Laura Chambers, co-founders of Jack and Grace, a communications and impact relations agency. Jack and Grace was launched during lockdown. And this episode, we explore the challenges and opportunities that the pandemic has presented over the last few months. Nyree, let's start with you. Just give us a quick overview of what Jack and Grace is all about.
We're a communications agency. I suppose the thing that makes us a bit different is that we only work with clients that place purpose at the heart. So we kind of test clients before we work with them to make sure that it's not just about profit, it's about people and planet as well.
Oh, interesting. So it's purpose driven in the sense of you really do exclusively select clients that you want to work with on that kind of level, on that purpose of what you're actually producing.
Yeah, we made a decision early on. I think there's so much chatter about purpose at the moment. Everybody's doing it. But I think if you really believe in it, that's all you should be doing. We've heard a lot through our careers that it's not possible to only do work that's doing good. It won't pay the bills. And I think it's time to, if there's any time to prove that wrong, it's got to be now.
What I find fascinating about what you guys have been doing is you launched during lockdown at a time of everyone's talking about the change and the challenge of trying to keep the demand up and clients dropping off. You guys actually started the business and you've successfully done it. So if you just talk us through how you were able to navigate and why you decided, despite lockdown, that you were going to continue launching Jack and Grace.
Yeah, we started our conversations to set up Jack and Grace at the beginning of the year. Obviously, not expecting to be officially launching in a pandemic situation, but we were both fortunate enough to be in a position where we were risk-free in our personal situations for starting the business. So we effectively had nothing to lose. So we ploughed on with our plans and launched in lockdown. I think that gave us an opportunity, building on what Nyree just explained about being purpose-led. It gave us a chance to really focus on working with the clients that did fit with our ethos and our values, and gave us the opportunity to think more carefully about the work that we wanted to do and the clients that we worked with.
And the most obvious question to follow up that is, did you find that in the lockdown environment you were able to successfully launch and that you weren't impacted by a sudden drop off of the potential client leads that you had that suddenly didn't have the money or the budget or couldn't do a handover to a new agency in that lockdown period?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we were starting from a zero position in terms of work. So we were building from scratch. So in terms of having an opportunity to think about whether there was a drop-off in demand, that wasn't really something we were benchmarking against. Everything was new to us. Everything was a gain. But actually, the conversations we were having were really positive around the type of work that clients were looking for and the services they needed. And their demand was still very much there, albeit they were working in a more challenging environment around their own situations for adapting to the changes and the home working and the remote kind of situation that they were thrown into. So having those conversations with clients actually for us was slightly easier because all of a sudden everyone was at home and they were accessible. We could make Zoom calls and jump into a video conference call so much easier than trekking across London and physically meeting with people that were running between different meetings. So it was so much more accessible for us to have those conversations with clients while they were adapting to the changes around them as well.
What do you think that says? I mean, Nyree, coming back to you about the fact that you as a new company were able to win that new business in a very turbulent time. And you compare this to a lot of other companies we've had on the podcast, and they talk about the real struggles of maintaining client demand during those first few months. Do you think that says anything about the way lockdown or the way rather that PR agencies can can function in lockdown, and perhaps being small and slim and agile has been to some extent an advantage. In your case, you're the extreme of it, of course, because you didn't come with any kind of baggage or kind of things you had to deal with. You were starting on a completely free base. Do you think that there's any truth in that?
I do, and I know from speaking to colleagues who are working in big agencies, medium-sized agencies. When lockdown first arrived, there was such panic, and we were completely protected from that, because I think partly because the type of work that we do means it was more resilient. We were more resilient. We're not in travel, for example. I know agencies with a lot of consumer work were affected. I had colleagues who had started new jobs and were made almost immediately redundant before furlough arrived, and we were just kind of watching it unroll and carrying on, because we weren't affected. I think decisions maybe took a little bit longer on the client side, but again, I think it sounds really dramatic launching in lockdown, but I think it's worked to our favour in almost every way so far, hasn't it?
And it's a very positive and it's a viewpoint and experience that you've had, and so different to so many others. But I suppose the question then is, were there any challenges? I imagine when you were initially coming up with how you were going to start Jack and Grace before lockdown, things had to change when lockdown happened, and strategies had to change. Was there any real challenges that you faced, both of you as an organisation, but also individually as well? I don't know, Laura, perhaps if you take this one on first.
Yeah, I mean, like everybody was thrown into a situation of disarray, I suppose, in terms of structures and ways of working. For us, childcare was a main issue that we had to adapt to. Suddenly having no nursery was and no kind of grandparent support was suddenly quite a scary prospect. But actually it didn't dampen our spirit and our enthusiasm for launching the business. We just had to work differently around managing that kind of childcare provision, balancing it between our partners and just working different hours and more flexibly to allow us to continue to build the business and press on.
And what was the way? I mean, you mentioned childcare being a good example of the challenges. And you mentioned their flexible time as well. You both worked at different times of the day. Was that enough to get you guys into a functioning flow as well? Or were there other things that you tried to introduce or played around with or worked with in a different way with clients to get through that initial turbulent period?
It's funny because Laura and I haven't worked with each other for 10 years. We met in our very first kind of proper job.
Oh, really?
And we always said we would do something, and we've had ideas, haven't we? Some more viable than others over the years. But the timing just came together for this. And the more we talked, the more we realised we were on the same page about so much, about the important stuff. And some of the conversations we had really early on, I think, helped with everything being thrown into disarray. So, for example, I wanted to be really upfront about childcare demands, potential of having future children, so that we were going in eyes wide open. I think we don't talk about that stuff enough as an industry. You almost have to pretend you either don't have kids or you never want them, certainly at interview stage. So what we wanted to do was the kind of opposite of that. And I think some of the things we were planning, turning some of the rules of working in this industry and in an office on its head has kind of happened anyway, which has been great. But I did find like the juggling children was stressful. It was a real strain. You just end up feeling guilty about all of the things, and there's not much you can do about it. So that was a strain. And also the fact we couldn't see each other. We didn't know for sure that we didn't even question whether we'd still be compatible working. Luckily we are.
I suppose it was a test of our friendship. We were just going on the fact that we'd stayed friends since that initial first job, and that working together would be a good thing again. And thankfully that's worked out.
Do you think with your freelance network, have you noticed, did you see a big increase in, the availability of your freelancers or the number of people looking for work with you during those lockdown months? And I think you mentioned previously about an event manager that you identified as having skills which you could apply to other areas of your business. And I think they became a campaign manager as well.
That's right. Yeah. So we've had to think kind of creatively with our freelancers. So we've worked really closely with them. Again, because of the type of work that we do, the freelancers that we were working with were less immediately affected by lockdown and kind of the grounding of planes and things. But yeah, we have had to be creative. And one of the freelancers that we work with kind of badges herself as an events manager. But actually, when we broke down her skills, she's just an amazing, slightly terrifying project manager, campaign manager. She is slightly terrifying, isn't she, Laura? That's not she's
a force of nature. She really is.
She is a force. So when we kind of looked at her skills, actually, she's been amazing for us, and her work in events completely dried up.
One of the things which you mentioned to me before the podcast, which I'd love to talk about, was the fact that when you were going out and pitching for business, particularly during lockdown, you noticed that there were some other agencies who were also in the running, some of whom seemed to be very, very large organisations fighting over relatively small for them pieces of business. Laura, I was wondering if you just chat through what you noticed there, I think in the example that you had.
Yeah, we were pitching for a campaign which for us would have been a brilliant win, but actually for a major agency would have been a fairly small piece of work. And we were finding that, we got through to the last two, which was incredible for us as a new business and a smaller, scale and agile company, to be competing against a major player which had, all these disciplines under its one umbrella. That we were finding that, why, what's the interest to them? Why are they coming after this piece of work when it's, quite small scale for them? But is that because of the change in the environment and that all of a sudden there's not as much work around? Are they rattled by the environment and nervous about the future and therefore are having to take more opportunities that normally they wouldn't have been chasing?
Yeah, and I think it'll be really interesting to see wider, and I think that's going to be part of a discussion going forward as well. Is that how our agencies, bigger agencies that perhaps have had a tougher time with their business models, how they've tried to adapt over lockdown, and I think that will be something that does come out over the next few months, as well as people start talking and reflecting on that period as well. But certainly, really interesting to hear that of that experience you had. In terms of lockdown and the services that you were pitching for and winning and doing well in, what was doing well for you during lockdown? What did clients want in terms of a PR agency? Was there clear kind of guidance you were getting, clear demand that you were then really picking up on?
I think a lot of the work has been on the strategic side, people figuring out, how do I need to communicate in this new world? What do I need to be saying? And looking across audiences. I mean, Laura and I have this ongoing debate because she comes more from a marketing background. I'm more on the kind of PR campaigns, behaviour change side. And we have this constant tussle where I want to make a big noise and she wants to really closely look at the return on investment, which of course is right, but you need a bit of jazz hands as well. So it's quite a nice ongoing balance. But I think the work, maybe this again is where we've been able to be quite resilient because it hasn't all been external facing comms. Some of it's been how do we communicate better to our internal stakeholders? What's the right thing to be saying now during this uncertain time? So a lot of the work's been on the strategic side and a lot of it's been on the social media side as well, hasn't it?
It has, and interestingly as well, reflecting a very fast changing, although lockdown, seemed to have gone on forever, into a bit of an abyss, really. Actually, it was a fast changing environment for the temperature of what was happening at a consumer and a citizen level. And when we were working with our local authority clients, requests for services for them were around communicating quite tricky subject matters around domestic violence or child abuse campaigns that we were supporting on, because obviously those kind of situations were amplified by lockdown, and it was really important to react quickly and sensitively to those issues, and do that in a way that was going to reach the audiences when they were literally locked behind doors.
Yeah. Out of interest, I think it's what I think is really interesting with your journey is that you launched during lockdown and you won pitches during lockdown against other organisations, and at a time when a lot of clients and a lot of agencies were having a huge amount of turbulence and budget changes and everything like that. Did you identify, or could you identify any factors that were the real reason why the clients decided to go for you and your pitch above any alternatives? Because some people listening might think, well, as a very new business, a very new agency, obviously you haven't got a back catalogue for the company. So was it very heavily reliant on your personal stories and your personal experience that enabled your clients to agree to take what they might see as a risk with a new business which hasn't got that portfolio yet?
I think there were three things. One was the fact that when we launched, before we had any clients, we had a board in place, and that was an absolute priority for us to help guide us, challenge us, make introductions, and the board has been brilliant. I also think that it has been a massive leveller, lockdown, because everybody's in their home environment. Nobody looks as shiny as perhaps you would in person. And that didn't matter for us. They were just seeing past all the... They were just seeing us as they were seeing everybody else, and kind of being able to have that honest conversation without necessarily all of the sparkle of a bigger agency with massive budgets. And I also think other agencies were in panic. Of course they were. And we were completely shielded from all that because we were starting from nothing. So it does sound quite dramatic and impressive to have launched in lockdown, but we actually, having nothing to lose was a real plus point for us. We didn't have an expensive office to worry about or anything like that.
Yeah, that's really, really, really fascinating. We'll be taking a very quick break now, but coming up we'll be discussing with Nyree and Laura about how to tackle this transition from lockdown into this new reality we've got, and the long-term changes as well going on in the PR and comms industry. Don't forget that this is an ongoing podcast series, so if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe on your preferred podcast library, or you can have a look on YouTube and you'll see us as a video podcast as well, just by searching PR in Lockdown. We'll be back just after this break. Laura, let's start by just talking about where you guys are at now. What does Jack and Grace look like at the moment, and what are your immediate, let's say in the coming month, plans?
Yeah, sure. Well, effectively, we're 6 months in, so we're still really in the early days of setting up our internal kind of processes and really establishing our culture. And it's really important that we work hard to create that culture that we've got this vision for. Cultures don't just happen; they need to be kind of cultivated and nurtured. So we've done some really good stuff to kind of get ourselves up and running and work with some really amazing clients. And it's a real priority now just to look after those clients as best we can, make sure that we're really working as a partnership, particularly through these testing times, and so that we're making sure we're adding serious value to their businesses as they navigate their challenges. And it's about kind of looking forward slightly to the next step for us. We've grown quite quickly, very, very quickly as well. And it's just making sure that we're not growing too quickly, that we can't service, look after the clients, and we don't want to kind of trip up along the way. So it's making sure that we're taking the opportunity to step back and appreciate our situation, putting in place processes and kind of systems that support our virtual kind of network of people and the team to do their job really well. We're really spread out, but obviously because of the situation we're in and our kind of goals for being a bit of a virtual remote working agency, that suits us fine. But we've got to make sure that those systems are in place to kind of allow our team to work best.
Are you planning to stay virtual, a fully virtual solution, or are you looking actually to have a more hybrid model in the coming, let's say, 5-6 months?
For us, we are keen to work in a way that suits our team. So if it was really important to our team to have a physical base, then we would look at that as an option. But actually the intention is to work in a way that fits with our team and what kind of they want. I think at the moment our intention is to stay remote because that suits us as the team that we are. But it might be that
working from home though, just to register that for us, can we maybe think about, because it is like at first it was great and now it's just a bit,
you can't Zoom can't replace the physical interaction, can it? So it might be that we need some sort of touchdown space or some sort of opportunity where we come together.
I mean, in terms of the next few months, do you see it as full of opportunities as opposed to risk and reduction? Because I think that'll be interesting to explore with you, because I think you're maybe in a different position to a lot of the wider industry.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at it as real opportunities. Our kind of concern isn't, I mean, we couldn't, downsizing is on the radar of loads of people, but it's obviously not a concern for us. It's all about, as Laura said, kind of consolidating what we've built so far by doing a really good job, and growing in the right way. I've certainly worked in agencies where the goal was sale, so it's really fast, it's new business, it is the absolute priority. So we want to grow in a more sustainable way with Jack and Grace. We want to make sure that it's kind of slow and steady. And when you
say slow and steady, there is it a case that when you're taking on clients, you're looking to take on clients, you're purposefully doing a very few number of pitches or a very limited number of pitches for business every month, or you're selecting the ones that you really like?
It's not necessarily about the number of pitches. I mean, we have a process where we go through and we figure out, is this one right for us or not anyway. But I think the problem when you're building an agency for sale is that your focus is always on the new rather than the existing. And I think that can be quite exhausting and quite dangerous. So actually, when we talk about growing in the right way, it's about looking after what we've got, organic growth, and looking at new, but not at the cost of everything else.
When you say opportunities, what are the services that you think are the real areas of growth in the next few months? The areas where, despite everything else that's going on in the wider industry, you've identified that these are still going to be really important and maybe even increasing as across the industry and across your clients. Is it again that social media side or that internal comms side? Laura, I don't know if you want to pick this one up.
Yeah, I think actually starting with a refresh strategy, because these are unprecedented times. Businesses are having to adapt, diversify, think differently, connect differently with their internal audiences, but obviously their consumers and their clients. So having the opportunity to take a step back and refresh their strategy to make sure that it's relevant, I think is a really important opportunity for clients. And then I think there's, you say about social media, is that going to be become more prevalent? But actually, I think it's an integrated mix of channels that is going to become more important, and making sure that businesses are not just making noise for the sake of it. They're actually connecting in a way which is making an impact for the right reasons, and being more focused about what they're saying and what they're trying to achieve. So doing that in a way that adds real value to their business and not just going out and, big shiny ad campaigns for the sake of it. It's got to be about driving real value.
There's been a theme throughout, I think, this whole podcast and this whole discussion, which is the uniqueness that you have in being a 6-month-old company, having set up during lockdown, being very agile and being able to as a result, be very fluid and adaptable. And obviously the experience of many other established agencies. And just looking ahead into the long-term impacts of the PR and comms industry, is that something that you see becoming an increasing theme? Companies with bigger offices and bigger overheads potentially then need to start becoming more agile, not only with their workforce, but also more widely.
I hope so. I hope it's going to change. I think things have changed. It's been really tough, but the absolute revolution in working practices, in flexible working, and I hope it's going to have a long-lasting impact. I think it will do wonders for our diversity levels as a industry, which are not great at the moment. So I really hope it's going to have an impact. And having your home life available for everyone to see the realities of can only be a good thing. I think the days of hiding your children are hopefully gone for good.
Do you think that this hyper flexible and adaptive model is going to be the increasing norm, or at least the increasing demand from clients as well?
I do think that that'll be the way that we move forward. I can't see us going back to the original traditional, everybody trundles off to work at 9 to 5 and we cram onto trains and what have you all at one go. I just can't see that being a reality, because we've proven that we can be more productive, more flexible, and actually it works. It works for businesses and it works for individuals. And why would you then go back to something that arguably isn't as productive or effective? I think there will be a hybrid model. I can't see it being a complete flip to be full-time remote working, because again, you can't replace human, contact and interaction. People need that. There's also an element of considerations around mental health and well-being, even physical well-being. If you sit constantly in your home environment all day and you're not moving, that's something to be aware of, and I think businesses will need to pay attention to that. So I definitely think we're going to be moving to a flexible hybrid model, but it can't go back. I think what was really interesting to see is how quickly the shift change happened. Literally overnight, businesses turned their business models on their head and suddenly technology sprung up into action and everybody just adapted. I mean, some companies transformed their operations light years ahead of where they were at overnight. So it's proven that we can adapt to change quickly if there's the driving force behind it. And, it was the alternative was you don't work or you shut your business down. So obviously that wasn't an option. So people were mindful to adapt and go with the change program that everybody was facing together.
Yeah. Nyree and Laura, if people want to get in touch with you, both individually and as part of Jack and Grace, what's the best way to do that?
Not prepared for this question. Laura, what's the best way?
We're on Jack and Grace on Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram. We're at Jack Grace Comms, and Nyree and I are both on Twitter and LinkedIn. Nyree is at, God, go on, what are you?
It's my name backwards then forwards. Nyree was taken. I mean, I set it
That's
up right.
I've never heard of that before. So your handle is your name backwards and then forwards again.
Yeah.
And I'm just at Laura Chambers.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for being on the podcast and coming on and chatting about your, where you're at now. I think it's really fascinating to hear your perspective and your experience as a new business having launched in lockdown and the lessons and experience and insights that you've got from that. If you've liked what you've heard on this episode, don't forget that there are many more on your preferred podcast library or on YouTube as a video podcast as well. Just search PR in Lockdown. And we'll be back for another episode very soon. PR in Lockdown is presented by Rob Double, and the guests this episode were Nyree Ambarchian and Laura Chambers, co-founders of Jack and Grace. It was created by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA.